Welcome to Reclaiming the Faith with Phil Baker, a podcast with a mission to reveal what the earliest Christians believed about the core issues facing us today. You can find links to all of Phil's resources at philsbaker.com. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen today, and take a moment to share this podcast with your friends. Now, here's Phil.
Hey y'all, in episode 103, I was blessed to interview Dr. Judd Burton about demonology. Dr. Burton offers a course on demonology on his website, tioba.org. Contact him at professorburton@yahoo.com to find out more about that and many other courses he offers. This interview was such a blessing to me, and if it's a blessing to you, please consider leaving a positive rating and review on my iTunes channel, Reclaiming the Faith. Also, I want to encourage you to check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/Phil S. Baker, where you'll get access for $5 or more a month to 2 videos that I make each month. One, a tutorial video on how to play one of my songs, and also a video detailing either an early Christian or early Christian writings. The latest video in that regard is on 2 Clement, which is the earliest Christian sermon outside the Bible that we have on record. So please go check that out. Also, I'm blessed to be a part of Omega Frequency along with BDK and Kurt, who are doing just an awesome job putting out great contact for us every week. So please go check that out as well. Lastly, the early Christian quotes that I use can generally be found on the CD-ROM version of the Ante-Nicene Fathers, which you can purchase for a mere $5 on the Scroll Publishing website, scrollpublishing.com. All right, well, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into my interview with Dr. Judd Burton. Dr. Judd Burton, thank you so much for coming on Reclaiming the Faith, man. This is definitely a privilege for me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, I know a lot of my audience does know about you, but for those that don't, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a follower of Jesus?
Sure. Well, just a little bit about my academic background. I'm primarily a early church Greco-Roman world historian. I have a PhD in history with a focus on religion in the ancient world from Texas Tech University. I also have a master's degree in anthropology and history from the same institution. And I have a bachelor's degree in history from Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene. And like I say, I sort of wear the shoes of 3 different professions: historian, anthropologist, and archaeologist, because I've done work in all fields. And so I'm broadly equipped, as a humanities scholar. I have some language training too, and Greek and Latin, ancient Near Eastern languages like Hebrew, and some Egyptian hieroglyphs, and a little bit of Mesopotamian stuff, and some modern language material as well. I wrote my dissertation on the religious history of Paneas, Caesarea Philippi, which we can get into later. But in terms of my faith, which is married to my scholarship, I've been an academic for 20 years. I've taught at a number of institutions: history, ancient history, medieval, anthropology, archaeology, religion, mythology, humanities. I've taught a little bit of everything within the purview of the humanities. But my scholarship, that is my identity as a scholar, is also married to my faith. And that's the important anchor in all of this for me, is my faith. I was raised in the Southern Baptist Church and came to know Christ when I was about 10 years old. And it was I had a blessed upbringing in terms of my family because I was raised in a Christian home. All those things were modeled for me very well, and my maternal grandmother and great aunt and uncle were also very influential. I was introduced to archaeology and ancient history in that church. The brother-in-law of our pastor when I was 10 was an archaeologist and a professor of New Testament. And I actually later studied Greek under him at Hardin-Simmons, the late Dr. George Knight, who was one of my great mentors, very godly man, very erudite scholar, one of the most brilliant men I've ever known. And when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, he would listen to all my questions. I must have been this pesky little kid asking about everything, but he really took me under his wing and taught me the rudiments of archaeology and biblical scholarship and historical scholarship. And so very early on, I had that, it was that mixture of well, it was a kind of discipleship, really. And you throw all those things together, and a convicted and contrite spirit, even at 10, and that's how I came to Christ. And it's been, as anybody who professes Christ, who has a relationship with Jesus, it's the defining relationship in their life.
Yeah. Man, praise God. And I think one thing you didn't say quite yet about your background is that you're offering some different, is it certifications?
Yeah, there's these 12 course certifications on some other pertinent topics, I think. Context is very important for understanding the biblical narrative and its history and its theology as well. In fact, I've said before, context is theology. It doesn't matter what you think. I mean, it matters to an extent, not being dismissive, but it matters what's being said. And that has to be understood in the context of the worldview, the language, and all. That's where the theology lies, not in some, extended hermeneutic, that ventures way out into left field or something like that. Yeah. And, we all make those kinds of I suppose, doctrinal, misinterpretations or whatever, but that's part of the reason that I came up with the biblical anthropology certification, because it is that deep dive into the geography and the history and the geopolitics and the culture and the religions of the biblical world, even a sprinkling of apocrypha and languages too. And the biblical demonology was the certification that came next, and its importance should be self-evident. I mean, when you consider that probably a good third of Jesus's ministry was that sort of thing, it comes with the territory. When you take up your cross, that's part of the job. And in the wider context, the cosmic context, of this war between good and evil, it shouldn't surprise anybody, especially after discipleship, that this has to be part of the faith. And we're living in a time when I think, the prophetic clock is ticking. I'm not a date setter, nor am I a prophet. But I can see the meta picture, using the tools that I've been, that I've gained along the way, in terms of my scholarship. The biblical demonology coursework deals with, the same kind of thing I've been doing for a number of years, really, beginning with books like Interview with the Giant, applying anthropological models to the study of the demonic and the giants, and applying anthropological models in general to the Bible. And so looking at the demonic world in terms of its hierarchy, a culture of demons, if you will. There's coursework in biblical demonology. Merrill Unger's Biblical Demonology is a textbook for the class of that name. And again, that's kind of self-evident. The latest sort of extension of that is the certification in preternatural morphology, and that's that's like a $25 word for saying how demons manifest in folklore and myth. Yeah. And so you're looking at things that often get peripheralized, but are demonic nonetheless, and leave a track record in the history and cultures of the world. Things like vampires and werewolves and revenants and ghouls and all manner of folkloric creatures, which are very clearly demonic. None of these entities have the best interests, much less the eternal interest of people that they plague. And so looking at those things through the lens of the Bible is the basic track of the preternatural morphology coursework. And I'm running a special this week, and each one of those is $125 a piece. So it's a good time to click in on that if you're feeling led to study these. And I made them flexible, for people. I realize, people are working and have families, and money's tight for a lot of people these days. And so I wanted to make them flexible and affordable. Now, I do offer some graduate work, more extensive involved work, and there'll be more certification programs, more expansive certification programs, which will run a little bit more once they're developed and deployed. But right now is a really good time to get on these deals. And I also launched, if people are interested in studying Greek, I've got a Rudiments of New Testament Greek course that people can take advantage of. And if they're interested, they can email me at professorburton@yahoo.com, and we can get you registered.
And where can they go to find some of these? Is this burtonbeyond.com?
Yeah, and well, with the caveat that I am in the process of upgrading my websites. So they're a little bit in transition right now, but if people want to email me and ask about the program, I can send them some information about it. But like I say, in a general way, I just laid out the curriculum for each one of those programs. But you can also go to the Institute website, which is tioba.org, and there's some information there too.
Awesome, and I'll have links to all that stuff in the show notes. Thank you for doing that, man. Like, gosh, talking about a course in demonology, like I was thinking about Mark chapter 1, and he comes, Jesus starts preaching the kingdom of God at the beginning, and then I believe it's 7 times that either the word demon or evil spirit occurs in that first chapter. So it seems like that was a pretty
just
big,
right off the bat.
Yeah, it seems like that's a pretty big part of Jesus's ministry, Yeah,
definitely.
So can you tell us a little bit about Banias and Caesarea Philippi and its connections to demons?
Yeah, certainly. Well, it's part of my journey. As I was coming to the close of my undergraduate studies at Hardin-Simmons, the aforementioned Dr. Knight, who was my mentor, had encouraged me to go on an expedition that the college or the university was going to undertake. They had been sending students to Banias to excavate. He said, "You really should go. It'll give you the rudiments of the science of field archaeology, and it'll be a good experience for you." And great, So I signed up, and in my mind, there wasn't anything necessarily spiritual about the trip. I mean, it was going to be cool to get to see Israel and to do the archaeology, but my main goal was I was there for the science, there for the process, the learning the rudiments of archaeology. And I did do that under the likes of the late Vasilius Zafaris and Dr. John Laughlin, who lives he was teaching at Averett. He's written a number of books on the Bible. But that old silver fox, I wouldn't know anything about archaeology if it wasn't for him. He was tough. But in the months leading up to the departure, I was reading everything that I could on Caesarea Philippi. You know, there were a couple of master's theses in the in the library there at the seminary, and nothing too exhaustive, but enough to give me some good, you know, material to work with in terms of its history. And I shouldn't say stumble. You know, God put this in front of me, but I began to realize that, you know, the geographical location of this place was at the foot of Mount Hermon, and I read an article, you know, talking about the Watchers and the Nephilim being associated with Mount Hermon. I thought, that's really interesting. And so I at that point, I began reading, you know, all this apocryphal material, you know, like Enoch. That's when I discovered Enoch and the Genesis Apocryphon and some of this other stuff from the Dead Sea Scrolls that talked about it. And so, you know, once I found that, you know, I spent an hour at the copier, you know, copying all this stuff off. And I was just amazed. I was like, oh my gosh, this is ground zero for Genesis 6. You know, the Watcher incursion. And so, you know, with that on my mind as we're leaving, you know, the trip became not only a classroom or a laboratory for learning all this stuff, but, you know, it also became a kind of pilgrimage for me. You know, it was just another thing that opened my eyes to the spiritual significance, the cosmic significance of this struggle between good and evil. You know, and every day, you know, at Bonias, although we were working on a you know, first century era palace there, we were always working in the shadow of Mount Hermon. You know, it was just looming, you know, right there. And you know, that was the first part of the discovery, was the work that I started at Bonias. And I sort of set that work aside, not the interest, but, you know, being directly involved in, I suppose, biblical antiquities, because I felt like I needed more tools than just field archaeology. I needed the cultural anthropology, the folklore stuff to also begin to, you know, deconstruct some of the problems that I was coming up. And that's why I opted, instead of doing a master's in classics where I would basically be rehashing all the Greco-Roman stuff and the language that I'd done, I opted to study anthropology. And I continued my work in archaeology, and got experience, you know, all over the world, you know, all over the state of Texas. I've done archaeology on both sides of the globe, while picking up this cultural, you know, ethnological toolkit that could help me understand, you know, religion and folklore and even the Bible from an anthropological perspective. But it was when I decided to go back to history and began my PhD studies, that I picked it back up. You know, the queries that I had about Caesarea Philippi, and my dissertation advisor was very encouraging about developing a basically a history of the religion of Bonias, which had not completely been done. You know, there certainly have been dissertations and works on Bonias, But there was not one that sort of used things like anthropology and sacred geography and microhistory and some of these other tools to understand the history of the site. And it's not a theological work; it's a history of religion's work. But you can see the theology behind it as if you or your friend are reading it right now. It sort of tells the story, from the beginning to almost to the modern era of the reuse of the site, the importance of the creation of sacred space by the Watchers.
Yeah.
In prehistory, because like I say, this is ground zero. This is where the Watchers, the sons of God, the Benach Elohim, came down, and that's where the corruptive influence that contributed to the degradation of humanity and basically the destruction of the surface of the planet. That was the seed of wickedness, or certainly one of them. We would consider Satan, the Nakash, as the first part of that, but this was an epiphenomenal seed of that. Can
I ask a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is just coming to my mind a couple of days ago, and there's nothing new under the sun. So I'm not trying to act like this originated, in my head or whatever. But I was thinking about the proto-evangelion or whatever from Genesis 3, and the promise that God's making, prophecy that He's making about the seed of the woman, crushing the head of the seed of the serpent. I believe that word is zerah. Is that right? Offspring, right? Mm-hmm. And so do you think it's possible that these rebellious angels in Genesis 6 are acting upon a belief that they can have offspring based on that prophecy from Genesis 3?
I think in many ways, yes, they are. And clearly they had clearly they did have offspring,
right?
Or developed them or created them, because of the way, that sets the precedent for these extra dimensional beings basically manipulating matter.
Yeah.
In our, to kind of put it in dimensional quantum terms, we get that in the Bible too: first heaven, second heaven, third heaven, so forth.
Yeah.
I think very clearly that's the precedent.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you, brother.
No. But I think I'd basically finished my train of thought.
Okay.
But the what's interesting about the long-lasting connection, the legacy of the Watchers at Banyas, is that one of the most culpable of the Watchers was Azazel. And Azazel, of course, is associated with the goat. Anybody who reads Leviticus knows about the atonement sacrifice. The goat to Azazel, one is sent off into the desert or thrown off, a cliff into, on the jagged rocks. Right. All that's mimics the punishment that Azazel gets in books like Enoch, First Enoch. But what's interesting is that you have this procession of goat deities. And for folks that read either my dissertation or Paneas, which is a kind of distillation, it's a book that I wrote that it's not the exact same thing as my dissertation, because there's some other trajectories that I follow, and it's on sale this week too. And what's interesting is that over the ancient history and even into the late antique and medieval history of the region, these goat deities, continue to be associated with that region. Now the big one, of course, is Pan, where the name of the place actually derives from. It's mentioned as Caesarea Philippi in Matthew chapter 16 and Mark chapter 8, only because, for a brief time, when it was a thriving city, it was, this is kind of a nod to Caesar. You had Herod Philip, giving it the designation Caesarea. But its original name was Paneas, or the Paneon, which is an association, of course, with the Greek god Pan, whose shrine was designated in a cave at the southwestern edge of Mount Hermon, the Grotto of Pan, if you will. And but in my mind, this is just a continuation of something that began in prehistory and rebooted in the early post-flood world, because, as I say, there are any number of goat deities and half man creatures that are associated with the region. Even the Hebrews, had the Shedim, the hairy ones, which are satyrs essentially.
Yeah.
There
it's
were
Isaiah,
gods
right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Chapter 34, I believe. And you had, in the Mesopotamian world, you had deities like Bennu, whose name is even phonetically similar to Pan, and probably speaks to, the Eastern origins of a lot of the Greek deities. We know that's been confirmed, that the Greeks believed that a lot of their deities were from the East. And you had deities like Adzaga, whose name retains the word for goat, odds or uds, in most Semitic dialects, and any number of them. One of the chief gods of the Amorites, Amaru, was a goat, shepherd deity. So there was really a profusion, of these deities. There's a procession of them from the time of the Watchers. And in my mind, that's a continuation of this cult that was established in prehistory, at the behest of the Watchers, and Azazel was probably the head of it. Azazel is associated with not just teaching mankind witchcraft and women how to, use cosmetics or whatever, but also metallurgy and warcraft. And, Pan is, a lot of, you don't see this on the surface, but Pan was associated with both of those, all of those things.
Right.
He was a lusty, character, and the Greeks believed that he helped the Olympians overthrow the Titans. His name is where we get the word panic from. He had a war cry that was supposed to terrify and paralyze people. So there's all this connective tissue, beginning in prehistory, going all the way through antiquity, and even in later years, let's say the late Roman and the post-Roman world of late antiquity, where there were things like Al-Qaeda. Once the Muslims took over Banias, Al-Qaeda is the green one in their saint catalog, their hagiography, and a lot of people associate Al-Qaeda with Saint George. Interestingly enough, whose naming, George in Greek, Georgos means gardener or farmer. So there's this sort of natural element, that you would find amongst Pan. So it just sort of, there's clearly a principality of some kind.
Yeah, an etymological. How do you say that? Etymological link?
It's a mouthful. Yeah, etymological. Yeah,
there it is.
Yeah. Well, that's one part of the equation. It's the language component. It's the culture. It's the reuse of first of all, the creation of sacred space. Yeah, and then the reuse and recycling of sacred space.
Why do you think Jesus chose Caesarea Philippi to be the place where he first tells his disciples that he's going to suffer and die and rise again?
Well, because that's the vanguard of his entire mission, and he chose Caesarea Philippi because of the its significance, its cultural and religious significance for his disciples would not have been lost on them, and even Jews that would have lived in Caesarea Philippi, and likely even the native Etrurians, who were basically Greco-Roman culturally, would have been familiar with the stories about what the Jews believed had happened at Mount Hermon. So he's intentionally going there and firing a shot over the bow of the enemy, because again, it's ground zero where the Watchers descend. To the east of that, you have Bashan, Og's old kingdom, which at the time was called Battania, which was Latinized. To the east, to the west, you had the apostate tribe of Dan, their land, and of course that the region of the Golan, and Bashan in particular, in the Ugaritic material is referenced as the place of the serpent. And there are some interesting discoveries in recent years. My good buddy Dr. Doug Van Dorn discovered something called the Serpent Mound there. This if you look at it from the aerial view, it's clearly serpentine, and the fact that there were ancient peoples like the Phoenicians who were calling this the land of the serpents, to me speaks volumes about all of those traditions would have been alive, and very much in the very much to the fore in the minds of Jesus' disciples. And so none of this stuff would have been lost on them, because Jesus is using this backdrop that was pregnant with all kinds of cultural and religious meaning for them.
Yeah.
But if you just do a cursory reading of those passages in Matthew 16 and Mark 8, you don't really see that.
Yeah.
Because it just seems like, okay, well, John the Baptist was beheaded, and Jesus and the boys went to, Phoenicia for a little while, and then they went to Caesarea Philippi. All of this is outside of the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas. So, it just sort of looks like, okay, well, they're just taking a little detour, to avoid some trouble or whatever. It's so much more than that. So much more.
Like, I don't know if you've been watching the Chosen series.
It's on my to-watch list, yes.
Yeah, the character development is just incredible. It's kind of loosely hanging to scripture, but it's probably the most realistic version of what a disciple would act like in terms of just their human reactions.
Sure,
that's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So recently, I think it was either in the last episode or the one before that. They've been traveling through Caesarea Philippi. And you can tell they're a little bit nervous about it, but the stuff that you're saying really helps shed light that when he's talking about the gates of hell, of course there's the place at the grotto called the gates of hell. Yeah,
the gates of hell.
But it's the heart of evil. This whole area is just from a Jewish perspective then in Second Temple, this is the heart of where all evil is.
Yeah, and they're in terms of the cardinal directions in Jewish culture at the time, north was the direction of where evil was, and this was as far north as you could go within the traditional bounds of Israel. Was the old from Dan to Beersheba. Of course, Tel Dan is just right across the valley from Banias.
Yeah, man, that's cool. That's cool. So you've been referencing some stuff from First Enoch when of course, the Watchers are talked about in Daniel 4, but obviously that they're the main evil players, the antagonists in the First Enoch. How do you think Christians should think about non-canonical books like First Enoch, but that are also part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or pseudepigraphal stuff? But
yeah. Well, in they certainly should be given consideration, not in terms of canonicity. I'm not saying I'm not equating them with canon, but they do culturally and historically inform, if not theologically inform, the biblical narrative, and particularly in cases where you have works like Jubilees and Jasher, and particularly Enoch in Jude. Mm-hmm. Jude is basically a copy and paste from passages in Enoch. If we believe that as Christians that the Bible is the inspired word of God, then it stands to reason that He inspired the people, the authors to the books of the Old and New Testament, to reference these books, these apocryphal books. And it gets really interesting when you begin to consider, the caretakers of this literature, the Essenes, what their stance was. In the Second Temple period, they basically had it, with the temple bureaucracy, the Pharisees and the Sadducees in particular. But they saw all that as a corrupted system. That's why they left and, went to the coast of the Dead Sea to form these monastic communities like Qumran. Yeah. And these were, there were Jewish people who were geared towards the eschatological. I mean, they were expecting the Messiah. Yeah. The stuff that John the Baptist, talks about in heralding Jesus's arrival, is straight out of what the Essenes, believed. And so, once you delve into that, it's hard to turn a blind eye to its importance. And so, I think the timing of the discovery of those documents is important too, because the first big cache of Dead Sea Scrolls is discovered in 1947, just a short while before the establishment of the nation of Israel.
Yeah. All right. So, what are some ways? Well, let me back up. First, Enoch talks about, and I don't remember the chapter. I think it may be like 15, where it says that the children of these giants are the demons. Is that right?
You're talking about the judgment that God gives to Enoch to give to the Watchers and the giants. Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of what Jesus may be pulling from in like Luke 11 when he's talking about these things going around in arid places, looking for a house.
Yeah. Again, if you just read this stuff on the surface, it's hard to connect it back to that. But when Enoch is telling him all this stuff, he says, you're the giants, when they're destroyed in this deluge, are basically going to become unclean spirits. And isn't it interesting that is one of the prominent words used for demon in the New Testament? Now, of course, it's in Greek, but it's the same phraseology, unclean spirit.
And why would that be? Why do you think he chose the author chose unclean spirit there in First Enoch?
Well, because they were the giants were aberrant. They were not part of the natural creative process. They were a product of let's just say the overarching Luciferian plan. Yeah. They weren't part of Yahweh's plan. It's interesting that when you see cases of demonic possession or demonization, whatever appellation you want, the terminology there becomes a little less utilitarian. Does it really matter if they're indwelling or they're outside, hampering, whatever, people having problems with demons.
Sorry to laugh at that. It's not funny.
Well, I didn't say it dismissively, but
demonized, right? Being demonized.
Exactly. Yeah, demonized. The incredible strength, the knowledge that they're not supposed to have, being able to speak languages that they've never been exposed to. That all begins to make sense when you understand that these were the spirits of the Nephilim, who had probably thousands of years of knowledge poured into them. They were immensely powerful, so much so that they contributed to the destruction of humanity before humanity was even completely destroyed in the deluge. They fought wars against each other. They killed off their own kind, and when they exhausted their own resources, they turned on humanity. So yeah, in this, it's interesting that you reference that passage because it sets up the core theology for biblical demonology. That these, and that's not often. It's usually taught that the demons are all watcher angels or fallen angels. That can't be the case, right. Just looking at it in terms of the context, the language, the culture, because if Jesus is using the same kind of terminology that's used, let's say, in the context of Enoch, that too is very significant. It's theologically relevant, and once again, it's the context that you find the theology in.
That's good, man. So you reference like super strength, violent kind of actions, like a false. I guess it's not. I don't know the right terminology to use. I was going to go glossolalia with tongues, but it's not a spiritual gift, obviously, but their spirit. That's speaking a language that they were familiar with. So it's not an unknown language. It's a known language to them.
I mean, just imagine. I mean, the world's been their classroom for thousands of years.
Yeah, we're their entertainment.
Yeah,
they're not playing the PS4. They're playing people.
In a word.
It was also making me think of like Mark 5 with Legion. How there's like a fascination with death, like going out to the tombs, and stop me if I'm not doing this right, but like there's a mutilation aspect, like self-mutilation, and of course these things can happen without someone being demonized, but these would be signs of like classic signs of like a driving away from community, from like biblical community. I don't know. I'm stuck there, but I don't know. What are some other, like, I guess a word could be manifestations, ways the demons manifest themselves, and what do you think are some reasons for those expressions?
Well, sometimes it's more subtle. It can be more subtle. I think we can see that in our own society in terms of politicians, people in power, people that willingly give themselves over to these entities. The power play may not be so much to the fore. In other words, the supernatural may become, almost completely veiled. But their actions speak, their ideologies speak to the demonic. And so, that's sort of, that's the hiding in plain sight. And again, these entities have had, they've got thousands of years on us in terms of strategizing and whatnot. Now that doesn't mean that they can't be defeated or that people can't be helped, because we serve a God that's, inordinately more powerful than these other entities. But at the same time, I think this is a manifestation that's should becoming more clear than it ever has before. But it's the ideological power play, the political power play, the social engineering. These are the subtler, more longitudinal kinds of activities of demons. And I wrote a paper earlier this year on the manipulation of language and the preservation of words like Rephaim or Rapha or or Rabba or Rapaumi, these variations in the ancient Near East, and all of the initial R vowel words that have survived from antiquity and probably prehistory as words for king or ruler. A handful of those would be interesting, but the number that I ran into was compelling. So this sort of 3D chess approach is definitely a manifestation, but it's subtler. It's not the screaming, violent, curse hurling, super physically powerful. This is the subtler manifestation.
From what you're saying, it seems like, and again, stop me if I'm going on a wrong direction, but it seems like kind of like the way God seems to be attracted to weakness, in a sense, like blessed are the poor in spirit in Matthew 5:3, and then like in 2 Corinthians 12, how Paul's saying like in our weakness God is strong. God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Like he likes to take people that are humbling and lift them up. It would seem kind of like you're saying like the demonic spirits are attracted to positions of power.
Yeah, because they created a false sense of empowerment, in the pre-flood world, and they don't want to give that up. Yeah. When does that stop? Well, our eschatological clue is in the fullness of the Gentiles. This is a phrase that you see.
Romans 11.
Yeah, Romans 11. When will that be? Whenever God says that, okay, humanity, you've had enough time. All the nations have had time to be evangelized and whatnot. Again, these entities know that they've been on the clock. Since the get-go. So they're trying to, so much of what they do is to try and stave the fulfillment of the fullness of the Gentiles, because that's kind of it's kind of a holding pattern, not exactly a win for them, but it staves off, in their minds, it staves off the judgment of Yahweh. But even in that contention, they're misguided and mistaken. That seems to.
I'm sorry, dude. Go ahead. I was just going to ask.
Go ahead.
Is that what you think? Legion says in Mark 5, like, have you come to torment us before the time? Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're saying. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and
that's awesome, man. Fullness of that's so cool.
Well, I mean, it's and again, that passage in Romans 11. If you're just reading it, you might not even think about how much eschatological significance that has, much less any connection with the world of the Watchers of the Giants. But again, context is theology.
Wow, this is awesome, man. I really enjoy this. So what are some things that people can do either accidentally or intentionally that could increase the likelihood that they will be demonized?
Well, people outside of the faith, are already more susceptible to that. And that's certainly, but that's, people in the faith who are Christians, that doesn't mean that you can't be, demonized. And again, not using sort of provocative words like possession or, to give the Hollywood image.
Yeah.
But, we're all susceptible. I mean, none of us is infallible, and we all have, I'm guilty of it. We have points where we, might become lax in our relationship. And, that can open up, toehold, so to speak, for these entities begin chipping away at you. But again, that doesn't speak to somebody's, it doesn't speak to their eternity, if they're a believer. But we're all under demonic attack. If you're following the precepts of Jesus that he lays out, and you've got a relationship with him, and you're doing everything you can to answer the call that he's given you on your life, you're going to be under demonic attack. And if you're not, you probably should be worried, because you're not even a blip on the radar screen. And we don't want to be, the Christians at the Church of Laodicea. We don't want to be the lukewarm Christians, who Jesus spews out of his mouth.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting that archaeologists just within the past year found the church at Laodicea. I think that's also prophetically significant, by the way.
Wow. It's just, again, you're talking about at least a third of Jesus's ministry. Yeah.
So were the disciples under demonic attack? Was Jesus under demonic attack all the time?
Yeah.
I mean, you hardly turn a page in the Gospels without, running into something. Some of it's more overt than others, but yeah.
Wow. So I was like contrasting in my mind Acts 19 in Ephesus with the 7 sons of Sceva, kind of pridefully, without being under God's authority, trying to use the name of Jesus, and kind of backfires on them, to say the least.
Right.
Versus, so that's like doing something bad. Versus, again, Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, not because he did anything bad, but because he was doing the right thing. And I'd like to get your quick take on that. It says, like, he was given an angelos, right, of Satan. So do you think that, what do you think that is? Because, like, on just a plain reading, it would appear to be like God allowing a bad angel to torment him, even though God's using that for good, to keep him from being prideful.
To refine. Yeah. All of those entities are still under the rank and file of the angelic hierarchy, which means that even though they're fallen, they're still under the direct control. Yeah, Yahweh says jump, they have to say how high.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's certainly not outside the realm of possibility that God is using them. I mean, here, we're circling back here.
Yeah.
If we backslide, in our faith at some point in time, that's not to say that God, won't let, one of these entities hamper us for our own refinement. But it's only, it's always just up to a point. I think about Job.
Yeah.
And he comes in and Satan says, here's Job, you take all this stuff he's got away from you, he's going to curse you. And God says, well, you can torment him, but you can't kill him. So there's that reining in, the precedent of that. And so I think that passage that you reference is another example of, the way that God can still use those entities to his own ends. I mean, they have no power to refuse.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It was reminded, the Job citation remind me, I think it's Matthew 26, Luke 22, where Jesus, after the disciples are like boasting, and Peter especially, like, even if all these fools run away, I'm with you to the end. And he says, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. So Satan had to ask permission to sift, y'all, the plural disciples, but I've prayed for you. Right. And so, like, even in that, it's almost like God's going to use that time of pride where Peter denies him to strengthen him for the future, so that he never denies him again. And not because of pride, but because of humility, almost.
Right.
For what's coming up in Acts. All right, we just got a couple more questions. Kind of bringing it home. I was remembering you're saying, at least when in your younger years you had some experience in deliverance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's something everybody like seeks out. Sometimes it's just kind of you kind of get thrust into it when you weren't expecting it, you know?
Yeah.
And I would imagine
hey, we're going to go pray for these people. You want to come with this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, I've seen people holding crosses in movies and throwing water and, that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure that's exactly the way Jesus would do it. But what are some strategies people should employ if they're in a situation like that? They're asked, come pray for, and maybe like some manifestation stuff starts happening. What are some strategies they should employ to help someone get free in that kind of situation?
Well, you definitely want to know, if your friends happen to ask you, well, we're going to go pray for these people. You want to know what you're stepping into. So getting a clear picture. And as from having done deliverance ministry yourself, it's the prayer is that's the weapon. That's the core of the process. But it may not happen in one session. You have to talk to, you almost have to build up a kind of, history of demonization for this particular person, to really get an adequate, handle. Because even Jesus, says that, when his disciples said, well, we've been trying to cast these demons out in your name. And he said, well, that's all good and well, but, some of these don't come out. Initially you have to, it takes things like prayer and fasting on your part, apart from the process.
Yeah.
So there are all these, there are facets to, the ministerial end of demonology that, you really have to have a handle on, before, some people, there are people that have, ministries that are devoted entirely to this, but this is within the call of every believer. If people need the ministering, then, the process is set out for us right there in the Gospels, and people should be able to take authority and pray, right there. If there are any kinds of manifestations that are taking place, or people, if people come to you asking for help, then it's clear that they're struggling, with this kind of stuff. What do? You don't turn those people away just because you're not part of a deliverance ministry. We're all called to do that, to some degree or another.
Yeah. The passage you referenced kind of brings us full circle, because that's Mark 9. That's right after the transfiguration up on
right.
Mount Hermon. So, and it's so, that passage, it's so interesting that they're evidently trying to cast a demon out without praying.
Mm-hmm.
And it, like, in one sense, it blows your mind. Like, how else are you going to do that? But in another sense, it's like, how many times are we in our culture dealing with something that's a demonization, but we're trying with physical means to, not that we shouldn't like take people to the doctor and that kind of stuff, but we're not even praying. We're trying with physical means to affect something spiritual, and you can't do that.
I'm afraid it's a consequence of overexposure to a purely naturalistic worldview. We've even in the church, we've lost so much of the supernatural worldview, which seems impossible. It taxes your imagination, really. And like, okay, you claim to be a Christian, but and you're okay with the virgin birth but demons and fallen angels and stuff like that, well, it's not a buffet. You can't be selectively supernatural. It's an all or nothing proposition. And, I think you put it well. It's not that we shouldn't, we have medicine for a reason.
Yeah.
We have all kinds of, help industries for a reason.
Yeah.
But, what is it that we're called to on our part again and again is to pray and to do so unabashedly.
Man, I think you just gave somebody out there a book title, Selectively Supernatural. Like, that's pretty good, man. You got to TM that.
No, I don't think I can. My buddy Mike Heiser was the first person I ever heard say that. I thought,
really?
Man, that's great. I'm going to recycle that.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, thank you again for coming on. Do you have any final words of advice or encouragement for those listening? And also, if you can remind people where to go to check out your stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just in terms of encouragement, we're called to prove ourselves by study anyway. And I think that's one of the things that's lacking in the disciplines of the faith, today is that, biblical literacy has just gone into the tank from what it was even, a decade or two ago. And so it takes these disciplines of the faith, the study of the word, because we're supposed to use it. I mean, that's our, our otherworldly weapon is the word of God. It's the original lightsaber. It's a more civilized, what was it Obi-Wan said, a more civilized weapon, or a more elegant weapon for a more civilized time. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
But, all kidding aside, just the disciplines of the faith, the active engagements of the disciplines of the faith is at the core of where we need to be heading. That if we want another great awakening, not just in this country, but in the world, then that's going to have to be the trajectory of the church. And we're starting to see the onslaught, have been seeing the onslaught, for months and years.
Yeah.
So, there's no better time than now to do that. That's part of the reason that I was called out of academia to start the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, and why I offer those programs. And if people want to take advantage of them, again, biblical anthropology, biblical demonology, preternatural morphology, they're all on sale for $125 right now. The Rudiments of New Testament Greek is $250 right now. And people can email me at professorburton@yahoo.com if they're interested in that. You can follow me on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I've got a YouTube channel that I post the Beyond Report and Quick Classics and all kinds of stuff like that. I need to be doing more Antiquity X, because that seems to be the most popular format, the slides and documentary kind of format.
Yeah.
And I've got a book that I'm writing with Dr. Aaron Judkins.
Oh, nice.
That'll be out this year on Göbekli Tepe and the Bible. I've got another one that I'm finishing up on witchcraft, and another one on these folkloric demonic manifestations. Should be out this summer.
All of those, like the witchcraft and oh man,
yeah.
Can I have you back on to talk about that?
Absolutely, yeah, anytime.
That'd be awesome. Like, because in addition to going out to Swaziland, I told you about, I've been out to Mozambique 4 times, like right along the Zambezi. My sister-in-law has been a full-time missionary out there for almost 15 years. And so you see so much syncretism out there.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I mean, you go to sleep, it goes dark, and maybe around like 11 o'clock, you hear the drums. And it's, I mean, it's legit, I mean, it's evil. But man, yeah. So I'd love to hear about that stuff. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again so much, Judd. This is Dr. Burton. This has been just great, man.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
lips that they